hello, and welcome to another edition of One Life, One Mic. I am your host, William Austin. Everyone calls me Brother Will. So, feel free to call me Brother Will. If you share this video, say, yo, you got to listen to what Brother Will is saying. Yo, that brother's on point. I hope that will be your comment, and I hope that also will be your suggestion as you forward this video. But once again, as I said, hey, I'm the only guy here today, so I'm your host. You got to put up with me for however long I continue to talk. But I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to try to speed this thing up a little bit. I may be talking fast, but hey, it's a video. You can rewind it. So just hit the rewind button, slide it back, whatever you got to do. Keep up with me and pay particular attention to this subject, because what I'm about to talk about today is something that I feel is one of the missing pieces to why we are in the condition that we are in. And that missing piece is, in my opinion, and granted, hear me when I said my opinion. That's all I have. I'm only one guy. I don't have all the answers. Never will I profess to have the answers. But I do have opinions, and I hope that these opinions are shared among you, my viewers. And I hope that these opinions may fill in the gap of a perception that you may have had and you just couldn't put your finger on how to identify it, what to call it, or what to say about it. But I'm just one man informing communities with opinions, and I hope that they will be received. So here we go. The topic that I'm going to speak about is a nation within a nation. How do we see ourselves as a nation within a nation? The importance of seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation, and the consequences when we don't see ourselves as a nation within a nation. Right now, we are experiencing those consequences because as it stands, we the world over do not see ourselves as a nation within a nation. I mean, it's as simple as that. We are fragmented and divided, and unfortunately, disunited. But we are still with a nation within a nation, regardless whether we see ourselves as a nation or regardless whether we see ourselves to be an isolated people. It does not matter if we do or do not see ourselves as a nation within a nation. The fact of the matter is that the world is going to deal with us accordingly. It is going to deal with us as a nation of people, not as individuals. So again, I'm going to talk about a nation within a nation. I'm going to talk about the importance of seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation, and I'm going to talk about the consequences when we don't see ourselves as a nation within a nation. So to begin with, in our historical journey on this continent, this particular continent, the current paradigm suggests that the dark ghettos, invisible walls, have been erected by white society, by those who have power, both to confine those who have no power and to perpetuate their powerlessness. Now, let me stop right there. When it says that the walls have been erected by white society, understand this. Our situation is not going to be intrinsically a black versus white situation. This is not what this PowerPoint is about. This is not what this presentation is about. This is not what I'm talking about, because we have no time to waste on worrying about someone else when we have so much to worry about in dealing with ourselves. So don't think that this is going to be one of those, oh, the white man this, the white man that. It's not. Later for that. I mean, just as we have playgrounds and parks all across this country, they're empty until someone has reason to go to them. So until we have reason to make that our dialogue, today, that is not our dialogue. So let me go on. It says that these walls and these ghettos have been erected by those who have power, both to confine those who have no power and to perpetuate their powerlessness. He goes on to say that these are political, social, economic, and educational colonies, and that the people in these ghettos, as they call them, are subject peoples, meaning that they are conquered people. They are people who have been dominated and in some ways exploited. This is where he says victims of greed, cruelty, insensitivity, guilt, and fear of their masters. Okay. Now this was a paradigm that was iterated by Kenneth B. Clark during the 1960s civil rights movement. Now, during that time, not too many people seen us as a nation within a nation. However, those who were in the know per se, they saw us as a nation within a nation. and they dealt with us as a nation within a nation. Here we have two authors of American Apartheid, Douglas Massey and Nancy Denton. Both of these authors came together and they co-authored a book called American Apartheid, because at some point when you look at the situation of black men and women in this country, you always have a reference point to compare or equate our situation to. And what these two had done was they compared and equated our situation to the apartheid in South Africa, which was no different. The only difference was one was called apartheid, the other was called segregation. So, but this is what they said. They said black segregation is not comparable to the limited and transient segregation experienced by other racial and ethnic groups now or in the past. No group in the history of the United States has ever sustained the high level of residential segregation that has been imposed on blacks in large American cities. Now, when it says no other ethnic group, no other racial group has experienced this form of segregation or this type of segregation or any segregation to this magnitude, let us understand this. That experience alone, not coupled with the other historical experiences that we've had, the inexpressible cruelties, the inhumane treatments, etc., but this here by itself makes us a unique ethnic group in this country, because this experience created a psychological response within us that continues down to this day. Just as soldiers, when they go over to Iraq or they go over to Afghanistan and today Libya, or even soldiers of the past during World War I, World War II, you know, they said that these soldiers are subject to post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, and this was a disorder that was the result of a traumatic event. Well, segregation, along with other historical events in our past, were traumatic events. So if a soldier can undergo post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of his traumatic event, so can we. And so have we. So when we say that segregation in the form in which we experienced it, no other nation, no other race, no other ethnic groups has ever experienced it, that right there in itself says that there's a different psychology. Okay? So this extreme racial isolation did not just happen, it was manufactured. All right, through a series of self-conscious actions and purposeful institutional arrangements that continue to this day. Now, once again, I say, I'm just a man with opinions. That's it. I just have opinions. And unfortunately, these opinions are substantiated by facts. Now, I'm not saying what I'm saying is a fact, but what I am saying is that these are things that we need to consider, whether opinions or not. We need to consider these things because in order to make one step forward, we have to consider the steps that got us where we are now. Okay? So, next paradigm. Back in 1967, the Kerner Commission, this was a commission that was called together by the president of that time to evaluate racial segregation and race relations of that time. And this is still during the civil rights movement era, during the 60s, the late 50s. And, you know, they wanted to get a survey of the racial makeup, the racial tensions, the relations, black and white. Now, in my opinion, there was nothing beneficent about this. I don't think that there was good intent about this. I think more so that there were ill intent, and I'll get into that as well. But this is what they said. They said that the United States is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and equal. It said two societies. It didn't say three, it didn't say four, it didn't say five. It said two societies, one black, one white. That can also be translated into two nations, one black, one white. This is the way that they seen us. This is the way that we were viewed as a people. If you read history extensively enough, you would have come across a statement that was made during the 1860s, I want to say it was, during the so-called emancipation and liberation of the kidnapped Africans who were referred to as slaves. And they said the prevailing question of this time and day is, what must be done with the Negro? Okay, they seen us as a nation. Although we may not see ourselves as a nation and we may not act accordingly, the world will act accordingly because they do see us as a nation. Anyway, it says that the United States is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and equal. To continue the present policies is to make permanent the division of our country into two societies, one largely Negro and poor, located in the central cities, the other predominantly white and affluent, located in the suburbs. Although I do not agree with the intent of the Kerner Commission, they made the statement that if they continue the current paradigm, the current policies, that we will be moving toward two different nations. One black, one white. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say that one will be poor and located in the central cities, because at this time the civil rights movement was going on. But prior to the civil rights movement, we had something going on that was called human rights and independence. And this movement was spearheaded more than any other group by Malcolm X. Malcolm X was for human rights and independence. And he was pushing this human rights movement. He was pushing it forward to the UN. And the UN was having open ears for this. So the Kerner Commission, those who were over the Kerner Commission, decided, you know what, we got to stop this human rights movement, because if we don't stop this human rights movement, it's going to be the end of us. So how can we stop this human rights movement? So what they done was they paid 4 individuals who are now known to us, individuals whom we hold in high esteem, which I don't negate that esteem. I don't take anything away from them for, hey, they've done more than I have done. I wish that I could do just as much as they've done, but as much as they've done, it still hasn't changed our current condition. But they paid Roy Wilkins, Floyd McKissick, and Julian Bond, and Martin Luther King Jr. $800,000 to start the civil rights movement. This was the money that was infused into that movement, and this is why they still control the NAACP, the Urban League, the Black Charities, all these other nonprofit organizations that are for progress and advancement of us, our people. But anyway, the point I'm making is that when human rights was going on, when the push for independence was going on, segregation was also going on. Jim Crowism was also going on. Unequal opportunities was also going on. And as a result of that unequal opportunity, the Jim Crowism, the segregation, we couldn't eat at Charlie's restaurant. So we said, well, hey, the hell with Charlie. We go create our own restaurant. We couldn't go to Charlie's school, so we said, hey, the hell with Charlie's school. We'll build and create our own schools. We couldn't go to certain areas or certain businesses in the white community, so we said, you know what? We don't have to go down there. We'll create our own. And in so doing, we had black schools, we had black hospitals, we had black libraries, we had black businesses, restaurants, churches, you name it, the whole nine. We had that, and the money circulated in our community. And granted, unbeknownst to a lot of us, this attitude and posture for which we decided to take was very prosperous. And in 15, 20, 30, 40 years, we would have been in economic power within this country, a nation within a nation. So the civil rights movement, what did it do? Aside from issuing certain civil rights or civil liberties, it gave the larger predominant society access to our dollars. Access that today they now dominate and control. Where once upon a time it took maybe 10 or 15 years for $15 to circulate out of our community. Now it takes 15 minutes for $1 to get out of our communities, because hey, I don't need to create a restaurant. I can go down here to Miguel or Jose's restaurant. I can go over here to Charlie or Ben's restaurant. I don't have to create my own restaurant. I don't have to create my own school, because I can have access to these schools now. So what civil rights done was basically gave the larger dominant economy access to our monies. And as a result of that, we are now a consumer-based people, which in itself is not a bad thing. We can capitalize on that. At any rate, we're talking about being a nation within a nation. So how do we come to be a nation within a nation? What is necessary for us to perceive ourselves as a nation within a nation? Well, fundamental to a group's ability to perceive itself as a nation, the group must understand its identity or self-concept. its personality or character, its culture, and how these translate into its ability to pursue, retain, and leverage power. So when we see ourselves as a nation within a nation and we take the necessary steps to move toward that, we actually attain and are able and capable of retaining power. Because as it stands right now, we are powerless. And what we want is power. But we got to understand our identity, not my identity, because as an individual, I can be whoever I want to be. But if that identity is not in accord with the group identity, then what I do is unknowingly become a part of the problem in terms of our advancement, our progress. Because I'm an individual, I have my own identity, which means I have my own pursuits, and those pursuits are unrelated to the group. Now, okay, I say unrelated to the group, I have my own identity. Yes, there's really nothing wrong with having your own identity, okay? Nothing. But what happens is when we don't have a group identity, then we choose to do those things that are harmful and injurious, not to the group in the immediate sense, but injurious and harmful in the long-term sense. Meaning, I can go out and choose to sell drugs, do whatever I want to do today. But in the long run, it hurts the group because now black men are looked at as drug dealers, they're looked at as thieves, they're looked at as rapists, they're looked at as non-human, criminal. I mean, because of my identity and what I chose to do. So the point I'm trying to make is when we step out into the world doesn't see you as an individual, whether you're a man or woman. It doesn't see you as an individual. It sees first a black man. It sees secondly a black woman. Then the process of identification comes after that. So if the world sees you as a group, then we need to start choosing things that allows us to identify with that group, a self-concept that links us to that group. All right, the personality, the character, all of these things. Once we have that identity, the culture comes afterwards. Well, anyway, what is power? This is what we're talking about, because being a nation within a nation, we have to have power. I mean, there are many definitions to power. I'm not going to go through all of the definitions of power, but the definition that we need, I'm going to get into. But first, I'm going to show you some of the definitions of power. The ability or right to control people or things, political control of a country or area, a person or organization that has a lot of control or influence over other people or organizations. Okay, now I got one highlighted because we do have a semblance of power in that sense, but that particular definition of power does not give us the ability to change our group situation. Okay, another definition, the ability to act or produce an effect, ability to get extra base hits, that's in sports, whatever, capacity for being acted upon or undergoing an effect. You know, these things all highlight an ability or a capacity. And we have the ability, we have the capacity, but we are not utilizing that ability or utilizing that capacity to its fullest extent because the definition of power has been warped. I mean, a lot of us feel like, you know, power, if I had money, I got power. But money does not translate into power. Just having money does not mean you have power. There are a lot of millionaires out here right now who have no power at all. They just have money and they can enjoy a wealthy life. Hey, I wouldn't mind being one of those guys. Unfortunately, I'm not. But it's the ability and the capacity to do or be or have is based upon the definition of those characteristics. So let us go to the next one. This is true power. And this, once again, as I said, this is my opinion. This is not a fact. This is not something that, you know, I got from Merriam-Webster or American Heritage or Oxford. This is just my opinion. So I don't want anyone to be offended. I don't want anyone to take these words the wrong way, because I know that there are people who are going to disagree, but at the same time, I know that there are people who are going to agree. But most importantly, I know that there are people who need this information. So let us look at what power, true power is. Power is defined in relation to people. It is about relationships. And when I say that, what I mean by that is, let's go back to the era for which the kidnapped Africans were called slaves. All right? In that relationship, you could take a 5-year-old white male or a 10-year-old white male who can go up to a 36-year-old, 46-year-old, or 56-year-old black male and say, get out my way, boy, or pick this up, boy, or do whatever. And that male, that older adult, responds to that child submissively. This is a power relationship. See, power is defined by the relationships that we established. Okay? Power comes with being alive. It is the essence of life and the motive force of growth and development and the adaptability of living things to environmental changes and demands. Power often refers to the ability to do, the ability to be, the ability to prevail, to overcome, to ascend. It is the ability to cause or prevent change. It is the ability to willfully resist or overcome certain social and environmental conditions imposed on oneself by others, or the ability to impose on others against their will or outside their awareness certain social and or environmental circumstances and behavioral demands. I want to repeat that because in that sentence you will see where we are referred to as powerless. It says it is the ability to cause or prevent change. It is the ability to willfully resist or overcome certain social and environmental conditions imposed on oneself by others, or the ability to impose on others against their will or outside their awareness certain social and environmental circumstances and behavioral demands. This is where we're powerless. This is what it means when it says that we are powerless in this country. Not that we don't have the opportunity to make money. We don't have the opportunity to participate in the political institutions or the legal institutions, the educational institutions, the healthcare institutions, any institution that exists in this country. Yes, we have the ability to participate in those venues. However, when it comes to our communities, we do not have the ability or the power to prevent what's going on in our communities and to create a different scenario or to impose other behavioral demands or circumstantial demands on other people, particularly the dominant group. We don't have that. We don't have power in that sense. So that's why I wanted to reiterate that statement. So, in fact, power can be seen as a chameleon of sorts. It always assumes the shape of its recipients or its environments. Power can only exist relative to its environment and the relationships therein. Okay? So now I don't know how you feel about this definition of power. It's a very lengthy definition, but it touches on a lot of different things. We're talking about power. Power is abstract, so you can't concretely define exactly what power is. But we have to define power in terms of our goals, in terms of our objectives, in terms of where we are and where we want to be. So this definition, I feel, fits perfectly with what it is that we're trying to do, and that is become a nation within a nation and leverage power. Okay? Now, when we talked about becoming a nation within a nation, one of the primary things that was necessary was identity or self-concept. All right. So what's my identity? Well, I mean, through genetics, now they know that everyone is the same. Everyone is the same. What differentiates us all is the 1001 strand in the human genome. The 1001 strand in the human genome. So it's only one strand that differentiates us all. So in essence, we all have the same identity. I mean, hey, you may agree, you may disagree, but this is what scientists say. It's not what Brother Will says. This is what scientists say. The only thing that differentiates us is that 1001 strand in the human genome. So identity is basically what I like to call a falsified consciousness. It's a philosophy that was brought about somewhere in, I want to say, the 1700s, maybe 1800s. I want to say it was definitely around the 1700s because it came also as a result of the idea and philosophy of free will. When you go back thousands of years and you study the philosophies of the ancient sages, you study the philosophies of ancient prophets, or you just study the ancient wisdom, you never see anything regarding free will. Because the ancients believed that we all were one in terms of our consciousness. There's no plural for consciousness. It's just consciousness. There's no consciousnesses. And if you're in a group and you're dialoguing, you're building, you're going through the math, do not say consciousnesses, because there's no such thing. There's only one consciousness, and that connects us all. So when it comes to identity, okay, I may think that I am this suit, or I may think that I am these Jordans that I got on, or I may think that I am the car that I drive, or I may think that I am the house that I live in, or the job that I have, or I may just group all of these together and develop my own identity. I can do that, but it does not say exactly that that is who I am. Because if you take a child and you let him be born in the wilderness of Brazil somewhere, or the wilderness of the Congo, with no people around, what is his identity then? Will it not resemble the beast of the field? If he lives long enough, he'll resemble the beast of the field. So where's his identity? Our identity is connected one to the other. In the words of Martin Luther King, he said, "No man is an island to himself, for every island is no more than a part and parcel break off of a larger landmass." That is us. Each one of us is a part and parcel product of the group. So therefore, group identity is more important than individual identity, and it is through group identity that this individual identity comes about, develops, matures, and benefits the group. All right? So let's look at a couple of definitions of self-concept. Self-concept is highly important in building of a nation. Just consider the rise of Europe and America. The West, its colonial powers. I mean, look at their self-concept. You know, while it can also enhance and maintain power, it can also simultaneously act as an instrument of powerlessness. And the way it acts as an instrument of powerlessness is when we don't have the right concept in terms of just who and what we are. So self-concept is influenced by the social impositions and conditioning paradigms of the dominant group in society. It has three distinct aspects operating as a triune concept, or what we call a trinity. The first in that trinity is self-identity. All right, this is the stage of the self, where it involves the physical body, the physical image. You know, we pay particular attention to that. This is when we start developing that self-identity. We look in the mirror, we see who we are, we either like what we see or we don't like what we see, and we make efforts to change it, we make efforts to enhance it if we like it. So the self-identity dealing with the physical image is highly important, because this is the stage that sets the playing field for the other two aspects of self-concept. All right, I mean, just look at how much money went into over past 500 years. Look at how much money has gone into and still goes into smearing the image of minorities, whether black, whether Hispanic, whether Asian. There's money in smearing the image of minorities or of a people, because in order to rule and dominate a people, they must be, first of all, oblivious to their identity. So I got to smear that image. Okay, self-evaluation. This basically deals with self-esteem. A person or group's evaluation of himself or itself, largely determined by how others see him or itself. Another word for this is self-esteem. To a good extent, the individual or group self-esteem determines what it or he thinks it is capable of achieving. Therefore, an individual's group evaluation of self will either set limits on his or its aspirations, or it will lead him to enhance those aspirations and actually achieve those aspirations. Okay, this ultimately translates into behavioral limitations compatible with the maintenance of the power and status quo of the dominant group. Meaning, when we have a poor evaluation of ourselves, then our behavior actually feeds, promotes, sustains, validates the dominant group. It actually justifies our position. That's what happens when we have a faulty image of ourselves. When our self-identity, our self-concept, the self-esteem, all of this is broken down, we actually do things to perpetuate our powerlessness. Let me give you an example. For instance, bleaching, skin bleaching cream. people who want to become lighter. They want to become lighter for a reason. They want to become lighter. They want to become white. Whatever the case is, they do not like their complexion. They are not proud of who they are. They want to be someone else. So therefore, they spend hundreds of dollars on skin bleaching creams. They spend hundreds of dollars trying to alter their image to become someone else. The money finances the economic status quo, while at the same time their mindsets feeds into the power and status quo of the dominant group. So that mindset does nothing for the group. It actually perpetuates the powerlessness of the group. Self-ideal. The self and the way the self is perceived and evaluated, the ideals the self aspires to realize, together form the self system. This is the trinity that we're talking about. The self-ideal. Let me just go back so you can see it. All right, the self-identity, the self-evaluation or self-esteem, and the self-ideal. The self-ideal is basically what you want to strive to. It is a system which shapes and determines our behavior. It is a system which basically it defines our characteristic ways of experiencing, knowing, striving, doing, thinking, remembering, acting. You see, however we respond to society, however we respond to our challenges that we are confronted with, is going to be based upon our self-ideal. Who it is that we not only think we are, but what we think we can do, what we think we can achieve, what we think we can overcome. And if that self-ideal is faulty, then we will not overcome, we will fall victim, we will not achieve, we will fail. You see where I'm going with this, all right? This system is most important, is paramount to an individual or group's actualizing the power of self-determination to act effectively in its own best interests. Or this system may be the means by which an individual or group is controlled and made to act in the best interests of others and against his own interest. So here, what we're going to do, we're going to take a break because I want to talk to you about ethnic pride, okay? Because self-identity, self-evaluation, and the self-ideal are necessary to give us what we call ethnic pride. Okay, we're back. Now, what we're about to talk about is, and I'm going to do this very briefly because I want to move on with this. I know I'm probably boring you. Then again, I know I'm not. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you an idea of what exactly ethnic pride is, because, you know, like I say, words have definitions have meanings. Those meanings impact our lives. So if we have a faulty definition, that means that the meaning is going to be faulty, which means that our consciousness that is derived from that is also going to be faulty. That is called a falsified consciousness. So I want to try to put out how can I say, a more useful definition in terms of ethnicity or ethnic pride, or looking at ourselves as an ethnic group or a nation. And when we think of ethnicity, understand this: ethnicity provides a primary basis for social identity and group definition, organization, and solidarity. The level of a group's social standing, success, and power is crucially important to its individual members' own positive self-esteem. Remember, we just talked about the self-evaluation. It's important to the group's sense of security, the group's well-being and purpose. It is of central importance to its members' wholesome existence and functioning, and is most tantamount to the promotion of group unity, loyalty, and morale. An appropriately high level of group pride, or ethnocentrism, combined with effective group organization, tends to generate group social power. And we can see this in terms of how immigrants are coming to this country and they rise. Most immigrant or ethnic groups that come to this country rise as a group. They do not rise as primarily individuals. That's not to say that individuals within this ethnic group do not rise aside from the group. what I am saying is that as these individuals who are members of this ethnic group rise, they bring their group with them within their group identity. And like I say, this can be seen more primarily with Asians, with Hispanics, with Latinos. Okay, so ethnocentrism helps to increase a group's ability and the probability of surviving, to survive, and to maintain its independence, thereby providing its members with some form of protection or freedom from negative imposition or tyrannies of outsiders. Okay? Ethnocentrism also provides the basis for a group or national consciousness. It reinforces nationalism and patriotism. It provides the emotional preparation for identifying with personal and group interests, and justifies and sanctifies individual sacrifices for maintaining the group's integrity and existence. Ethnocentrism, or ethnic pride, is the central force of power in almost any group. Understand that. Without it, the attainment of power is not happening. So ethnic pride is necessary for us to see ourselves as a nation within a nation. We're back to the identity again. Do we see ourselves as an individual, or do we see ourselves as a group? So when we talk about seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation, okay, understand that nationalism and nationality are two different things. So when we look at nationalism as an ideology, it has 1,000 faces. I mean, there's no one definition that will accurately pinpoint what nationalism is. But nationalism is rooted in the word nation, or the concept of nation, which literally means to, or implies that, whoever is a part of this nation or what have you, has, they were born or adopted as members of this particular nation or society. They share a common language or territory or economic life or worldview or set of social experiences, values, thinking, and behavioral orientations. All right, so we see that it's still abstract, because in that sense, anyone can be a member of a nation. But when we start talking about nationalism is, in its perspective, it's referring to a conscious sentiment that takes the nation as an object of active devotion, meaning that it's almost quite similar to having patriotism. I love my country, I am devoted to my country, and nationalism is like, it's synonymous twin. You see, I love my people, I'm devoted to my people, but that does not mean because I love my country, I hate other countries. So it does not mean that I love my people, I hate other people. So nationalism is basically and primarily the same as patriotism. The only difference is it takes the group as an object of active devotion. Okay, so one of the central bases for assuming a sense of nation is ethnicity. Ethnicity, the sense of a common descent, whether real or not. You can think it or not. When we look at ethnicity, when it's validated by generations of common historical experience, or when it's allied with nationalism, this has been the most potent force in any group's attempt to achieve self-determination, to struggle against domination and exploitation by outside groups. I mean, we see this most emphatically with the rise of the Chinese culture. I mean, when you look at the Chinese before, I never pronounce his name right, but Mao Zedong, when you look at their condition before him, you will see that what he brought was a sense of nationalism, a sense of ethnic pride, and within 100 years, look at China now. The same can be applied to any other ethnic group that has risen from the pitfalls of domination and exploitation. Ethnicity, ethnic pride, or seeing themselves as a national group was paramount to their rise to power. So now, has it been paramount to our rise, or could it have been paramount to our rise? Well, here we have Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, and I think this is Huey P. Newton sitting over here on my left hand side. In fact, when we look at ethnicity, we understand that it's the most important element in shaping the group's identity. Ethnocentrism is a universal human reaction. All known societies are, in fact, ethnocentric. You will not find a society that is not ethnocentric. It's the primary basis for social identity and group definition. It's the primary basis for group organization and group solidarity. Ethnocentric groups seem to survive better than those tolerant groups. Those groups, we got to love everyone. We got to bring everyone in. We got to just, have everyone a part of what we're doing. Those groups who are ethnocentric, that says, hey, let's get our house together first. And once we get our house together, then we'll decide how we deal with others. Those groups survive a whole lot better. All right? Now, Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey, this brother here, was he orchestrated the most successful black movement the world had ever seen, with over 700 different chapters throughout the world, not just the Americas, but throughout the world. Brazil, Europe, France, Canada. His appeal went worldwide. But what was the basis of his appeal? The basis of his appeal was, we are a mighty people. He referred to black people as Ethiopians. He said, we are Ethiopians and we are a mighty people. He said, princes shall come up out of Egypt and kings shall come up out of Ethiopia. And he brought this identity, this group identity, to a people who were downtrodden, overburdened, and left out to dry. And it was this sense of identity, this ethnocentrism, this idea of being a mighty nation within a nation, that allowed his movement to prosper. And at that time, we were prospering. Black towns were popping up all over America, where we were consolidating our resources, building schools for ourselves, building hospitals for ourselves, taxi companies, buses, train stations. We were doing things under the banner of ethnocentrism, under the banner of being a nation within a nation. Well, after his movement was effectively shattered and fragmented, years later, centuries later, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad came with the same idea of being a nation within a nation, having ethnic pride, coming and saying that the black man is the original man, that we are the original Asiatics, that we are a nation within a nation, we are gods and everything else and so forth. But the idea is this group identity that he brought, this group identity that fueled our ethnic pride, started motivating us once again, just as it does with all groups. All ethnic groups are motivated by ethnic pride. All groups are motivated by a group identity. All ethnicities are motivated by a group identity. This is a fact. It's not my opinion. It's an historical fact. So like I said, I am a man of many opinions, but that particular statement is a fact. When we have an identity that connects us one to the other, we make a difference. We make change. We make progress. It is only when we become tolerant of others in terms of having to have participation of other ethnicities or other minorities or other groups in what we're doing that we fail. And thus, Huey P. Newton. This is why his picture is up there. Because when the Black Panther Party started out, it started out in a sense of being primarily for our communities. It started out in the sense that we are who we are and we are about change. We're going to protect ourselves. We have a right to be in this country. It was a proactive campaign. But when they opened the doors up for everyone else to come in, it was shattered. So once again, the power of ethnicity, the power of seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation can only bring about the necessary change that we're looking for. And what change is it that we're looking for? We're looking for a change in the social dynamics that we now find ourselves in. When we look around this country, I've traveled every state in this country. I've been to every state in this country, and no matter where I go in this country, if I go or venture into a black community, It's the same black community that I just left in Louisiana. It's the same black community I just left in Mississippi, in Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. It's the same black community that I left in Texas, that I left in Oklahoma, that I left in Illinois. All over this country, our situation is the same. And this is not by accident. Now, once again, I said I'm a man of many opinions. And when I say that this is not by accident, I would like to say that that is an opinion. But if it was an opinion, it would imply that the alter ego of that opinion would be that black people, we just don't have the intelligence to rise above our situation. And I doubt the sincerity of such a falsified statement. No, we do have the intelligence to rise above our situation. As we stated in the beginning, these situations were manufactured. These situations were intentionally created. So, when we find ourselves in this situation, what is the solution? I would love to say it's Jesus. I would love to say it's Muhammad. I would love to say it's religion. I would love to say it's just a mere economic situation, or it's just a mere political situation or institutional. But the fact of the matter is, it is none of those, and none of those are going to primarily take us up out of this. But what will take us up out of this are two things. One, first, seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation. And secondly, developing an economic base. The problems that we are confronted with, the problems that we now undergo, the problems that we've seen for the past 20, 30, 40, 60, 100 years and more are all the result of an economic situation that we now find ourselves in. When you look at the crime, the drugs, when you look at the gang violence, when you look at the housing, residential segregation, when you look at the quality of education we receive, all of these things are revolved around economics. Because when you look at it from an economic standpoint, you can now divide their perception into two perceptions, as we saw in the beginning, where it's the Kerner Commission said that America is being divided into two separate societies, one white, one black. Compare our black communities, the schools, compare the businesses located in those communities, compare the entire environment with environments across the tracks. The only difference is the environments across the tracks have more economic investments. People invest economically in these communities, whereas they do not invest economically in our communities. We don't even invest economically in our communities. So the problems we're experiencing are economic. We must have an economic base. If we don't have an economic base, politics means nothing. We can elect, I don't know how many black politicians, whether mayors, aldermen, governors, senators, congressmen. We can elect 50 million of them if we wanted to. But if we don't have an economic base, the politics means nothing. There's no leverage. There's no power. We don't have lobbyists lobbying for us because why? We don't have an economic base. We don't have a big corporation that's controlling the situations of our communities and having invested interest in these communities to where they're trying to bring in a better day. If we don't have an economic base, we have poor politics. And when we have poor politics, the institutions that are responsible for the maintenance of our communities are going to also be poor and negligent. And this is the situation where we find ourselves now. We must develop an economic base. Without that economic base, our situation is not going to improve overnight. Now, these are just things to consider, all right? Things to consider. The current system of economics is not the same system that fostered European domination. And when I say European domination, I'm just using them as an example because the same system of economics that fostered their domination is the same system of economics that fostered Japanese domination during their time and rise, Russian domination during their time and rise. The system of economics that they used to is to rob, steal, kill, and destroy. I mean, look at the Vikings. I mean, they're a prime example. These people travel from country to country, killing, plundering, stealing, robbing. This is how they got where they're at, and they still do it to this day. I mean, it's no big secret that the war that's going on in the Middle East is not about terrorism. I mean, everyone has either some form of suspicion, or either they know that the war that's going on in the Middle East is about more than just terrorism. So we need not go into that because that's not why we're here. But just understand that the current system of economics that are taught in our universities is not the system of economics that's going to get us out of our situation. We must capitalize on that system of economics and realize that we had a system of economics before our kidnapping. I mean, you have archaeologists, paleontologists, you have historians who are still baffled as to how Egypt, Ethiopia, Nubia, kingdoms of the past became as wealthy and powerful as they were, and they didn't have no currency. So we have a system of economics that can actually move us forward, but we just have to capitalize on the current system that we have now in order to move forward away from the periphery. And keep in mind that economics is a set of social relations between people, not money, not wealth. And a good example is you and I, we go to a football game, we sit in the stadium, we cheer. Yeah, that's my team. Go Panthers, or go Colts, or go Dallas. We are participating in an economic venture, but our participation is far different than the participation of those that are sitting in the booth and those that are on the field. It's about relations. Some are getting paid, some getting paid more than others, some are not getting paid. The benefits, they change as the relationships change. So economics is a set of social relationships between people, not money and wealth. Okay, economy does not exist without people. It's not an object. You can't just sit it aside and study it by itself. You have to study the relationships of people. You have to study the attitudes of people. And those people who are most successful in economics, and I'm not talking individuals, I'm talking groups, ethnic groups, are those who have a relation with one another. Those who have a group identity that connects them one to the other. Economics is a collective activity, you see, and the activity is seeking group power. It's to advance the group. Group power creates and enhances individual choices. This is why the group comes together. You can do more as a group than you can as an individual. I mean, take a lesson from the bees, take a lesson from the ants. You can do more as a group than you can as an individual. So economics is not just about relationships, it's a collective effort. There has to be a group involved, not just a group of wealthy men over here, but a group of people and ethnicity. A nation within a nation must engage economics in order to change their condition. And enhancing group power. How do we enhance group power? We must see economics and education not as a job market or as a step towards moving up the ladder, but as a way of life, as a means of survival. And the reason why I say a means of survival is because when we look at education, we mentioned briefly falsified consciousness. And education must be given to an individual based upon the challenges that they are confronted with in their environment and the challenges that they must overcome in their future. If an education isn't equipping you to deal with your current environment, to overcome the obstacles of that environment, the impediments of that environment, the challenges of that environment, then your education is a faulty education and we're just being miseducated. So, as I said, we must not just see economics as a way of life, but we also must see education as a way of life, as a means of survival. And what we learn and what we implement must be attributed toward our survival. We must begin to perceive, acknowledge, and understand ourselves to be a nation within a nation. Okay, economics and education should be perceived in the light of the socio-cultural and political climate in which we find ourselves. As I said, solving our problems. If what we're receiving as an economic education or a political education, a social education, or a cultural education, if it does not equip us to solve the problems, it's a miseducation. Because in order for people to attain and retain power, they must first of all be equipped with the necessary tools that will allow them to solve the problems they are confronted with, the challenges that they are confronted with. Okay? So here we are at an impasse, a nation within a nation. Okay? What are the consequences for not seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation? Okay? One of the primary consequences is underdevelopment. I no longer refer to our hoods as the hood or the projects, the ghettos. When I'm talking, I refer to them as underdeveloped communities. And why do I refer to them as underdeveloped communities? Because when you look at third world countries, they're referred to as underdeveloped. But why are they underdeveloped? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a comparison between these third world countries and our communities, third world countries, and us as a nation within a nation in this country. And I just want to show you the similarities, because these similarities are the result of not seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation, but seeing ourselves as fragmented, disorganized, and not unified. So the underdevelopment of the third world is marked by a number of common traits: distorted and highly dependent economies devoted to producing primary products for the developed world and to provide markets for their finished good. The term underdevelopment, or we'll say third world countries, came about during I want to say it was the 70s, when they were just carving up the map, and they said, you know what, we're going to refer to first world countries as those European countries and our Western allies. We're the first world countries. Second world countries are our competitors. Those are the people that we must deal with the most. Those are the people that we may intend to form bonds and allegiances or alliances with. But at the same time, we must realize that they are our competitors and potentially our enemies. So they're second world. We're first world. Third world countries are those countries in which we are going to usurp all the resources. We're going to go in, we're going to colonize them, and we're going to take control of their resources, of their economic development, to ensure that they do not develop into a first world country. And unfortunately, third world countries are all African countries. I think there are two Central American countries in there. I think Central and South America are included in there, but for the most part, they're African countries. Why are these countries classified as third world? In my opinion, it is because this is where the majority of the world's resources are. Okay, so these countries are referred to as third world. So let's make this comparison. One of the characteristics of undeveloped countries is the cultural and intellectual elite are penetrated, meaning, they are summoned by the dominant group. The community's most influential leaders, opinion shapers, the movers, the shakers, the molders of ideology, they all identify with the ruling elite of the dominant cultural economic group and are dependent on a continued relationship with them. When have you seen a dynamic, charismatic leader arise amongst us who have not been dependent on the dominant economic and cultural group, with the exceptions of Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Noble Drew Ali, Elijah Muhammad? You see, they were not dependent on the dominant economic group. But every time someone stands up amongst us who is dynamic, who's charismatic, and he has something to say about an injustice or an inequality or what have you, he's always summoned by them. Next thing you know, he gets all this media press. Next thing you know, he's on talk shows. He's touring the country. He's a TD Jakes now. He's a Creflo Dollar now. This is what happens. And as this happens, it leaves our communities destitute of intellectual, potential to change our conditions. But every time something happened, they'll take one of these guys. Just look at the slide right here. They'll take one of these guys and they'll set him up on television, and he'll explain away our inequalities, or he'll rationalize our injustice. So this is one of the characteristics of underdeveloped countries. The cultural and intellectual elite are penetrated and summoned by the socio-cultural and economic dominant group. All right, another characteristic. The institutions, agencies, and governments are controlled by foreigners or a dominant economic influence. Okay? Hey, we don't control the healthcare institution. We don't control the money market. We don't control the justice system. We don't control the military. We don't control the institution of sports, nor the institution of religion. Just what institution do we control? We control not one institution in this country. Yeah, we may be elected to a position of importance within these institutions, but understand that these positions are just that. They are jobs. They are posts of employment. And just as they receive that post today, they can be alleviated of that post tomorrow. All they must do is say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, look the wrong way. So just because we have faces that resemble ours, who are, let's say, the Secretary of Health, or let's say the Secretary of Justice, or the Colin Powell, what was he? He was the Secretary of Defense. I mean, this does not mean that we as a group, seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation, having ethnic pride, have progressed or advanced any. It means that that one individual has succeeded and experienced a certain level of success in his pursuit of his own ambitions. So, once again, characteristics of an underdeveloped country. The institutions and agencies and governments are controlled by foreigners or a dominant economic influence. We don't control anything in this country in terms of institutions. So we too bear the mark of an undeveloped country. Next, more characteristics of underdeveloped countries. All right, relatively low per capita income. Okay, we fall into that. Okay, relatively small, weak middle class. That's us. Low rates of increase in labor productivity. Okay, capital formation. That's us. We fall into that. The African countries fall into that. Okay, a relatively high desire to consume the products enjoyed by the wealthier populations, which work to increase the quantity and value of imported goods and services over and above the quantity and value of goods and services exported. Okay, now I love that one because that one hits home. Okay, one of the characteristics of an underdeveloped country is that its population seeks to have and consume the products that are enjoyed by the wealthier or dominant populations. I mean, we all know someone who finally graduated from college, or maybe they didn't graduate from college, but they landed a good job. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not speaking against it because I myself probably would even do it as well. But the next thing you know, they pull up in the Mercedes, they got the BMW 750, or either they got the quarter to 8, you know, and they just balling out. We desire to consume the products enjoyed by the wealthier populations, the Tommy Hilfigers, you know, the Tom Fords, you know. So this is a characteristics of an underdeveloped country. We also fit that model. We spend more money on things that are imported into our communities in terms of being established in our communities than what we send out. The only thing we have to send out is labor. This is the characteristics of a third world country. Its major export is that of labor. Not the goods and services, but labor. Okay? The major export in our communities is labor. We all need a job. I need one now. Okay? An economy heavily dependent on external markets where demands for its human and material resources are relatively static and declining. Its small modern sectors of economy is owned by outsiders. Local entrepreneurships are limited as is managerial know-how. Businesses lack capital, and profits are not invested locally. This is a characteristic of a third world country, also a characteristic of our communities. A lot of the entrepreneurial endeavors or the businesses in our communities are owned by outsiders. Okay? All throughout our community, we have Asians, we have Arabs, we have Indians, we have Hispanics. They all own stores in our community. They all own businesses in our community, and yet not one of them invests in our community. Not even the relatively few local black-owned businesses that are in our communities even take the time to invest in our communities. So, once again, that's a characteristic of a third world country, which is also a characteristic of our communities. Another characteristic, unemployment is prevalent. Welfare and government aid is needed to sustain and control its population. The most important jobs in its local and public economy are held by outsiders. I need not say anything on that. We know that that is also characteristic of our communities. All right. Its politics and economy are subject to outside domination and control. Sounds like our communities once again, although this is a characteristic of a third world country. The economic and social infrastructure are relatively fragmented, unorganized, and disunited, and dependent on the dominant culture and influence for aid and or assistance. Once again, characteristic of an undeveloped country, which is also characteristic of our communities. All right, an educational establishment structured by the political, social, and economic dynamics of the dominant group so as to perpetuate the miseducation, the falsified consciousness, the poor education, and training of the community populace, thereby continuing the sustained underdevelopment, the non-competitiveness, and the dependency of the subordinate group. That was a lot in one breath, but you know also, as well as I do, that too is characteristic of our communities. We don't control the educational system. We just established that we are not in control of the institution itself. And yet the education we receive only supports the status quo of the dominant group, the political and economic status quo of the dominant group. It perpetuates a falsified consciousness. So, is it just a theory? No, I don't think it is. I think that these things are things for which we need to be considered, whether true or not. We need to consider these things. What soldier is going to go on the battlefield and not consider the tactics of his enemy, whether they're real, perceived, or not? He's going to consider the possibilities of this attack. So, seeing ourselves as a nation within a nation, the importance is it moves us forward. The consequence is it holds us back. It perpetuates our powerlessness. Until next time, one life, one mic. I'm Brother Will. Hotep.